I'm the author of the Bad Monster series.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Gaie, tell us a bit about the genesis of Bad Monster. Now, did the character drop in fully formed, or was it a thing over time?
Well, I first had the idea for a character that ran a brothel in the fantasy world some years ago, but it just sort of hung around in the back of my mind. And then I started reading about the goddess Inanna and also learning medieval longsword. So the two things I think were quite influential in actually producing the character. I took a lot of notes, which I ended up not using very many of those, but once I actually started writing and found her voice, she just kind of walked in and took over.
Okay. Tell us a bit about Bad Monster first.
Okay, well, she is a former avatar of the goddess Babaska, who was on her particular plane was the goddess of sex and war. She was trained as a temple priestess and as a fighter. Things on her home plane all went horribly wrong, and she ended up working her way across various worlds as a mercenary or as a courtesan, whichever was appropriate for her at the time, and ended up running the Red Lantern brothel on Scalptime.
Okay. Was it a lot of fun? Once you created that world, was it a lot of fun?
Oh yes, I mean, once I thought about the setting of the city and the portals around it, one of the things I had most fun with was the portals themselves, and just thinking about what doors between different planes might feel like and sound like and look like, and all the sundry things that might be going on the other side of them. Some of them are quite simple doorways between planes, and some of them were a bit crazier than that. I did have a lot of fun with that part. And I had a lot of fun with the city itself and the various people who inhabited it.
The issue of strong female characters is a hot factor in drama fiction at the moment. What are your feelings on the matter about the way that science fiction and fantasy treat female characters?
Well, I think it's... Women have always been strong characters, and the idea that there's anything outrageous about depicting them as such has always struck me as a bit daft. I think science fiction and fantasy haven't always had the best of records on depicting strong female characters, but a lot of it does, and there's certainly room to do that. I mean, you've had strong female characters in fantasy going back, well, at least as far as women go, though she's not necessarily a positive role model. So I think that I don't really see it as, I think people make a controversy of it. I don't think there should be anything controversial about depicting someone female as a strong character any more than depicting someone gay as a strong character or someone adolescent as a strong character.
Do you think the science fiction fantasy, it can be quite egalitarian in that because you can create anything you want, any kind of societal boundaries can get torn down?
Oh, I certainly think the room is there to do that. I think you can be very egalitarian and you can experiment with social structures. I mean, you can take things that are common social structures or common roles in cultures that already exist and take them to their potential extremes, or you can flip them on their head and do something completely different with them. And this is certainly not a new thing. I mean, Le Guin was writing about characters that naturally shifted gender from one to the other many years ago. So you can do anything so long as you make it work. And there's certainly the potential to write about types of culture and society and gender role that don't as yet exist, simply because we're very good at thinking of things that don't as yet exist.
Okay. Why did you make Babylon Sphere a bottom? Because there's people get funny about sex and violence. I recently had the issue with people talking about these Jewish red gay, and people just went absolutely ballistic. People are very funny about sex, so why did you put sex so firmly at the centre of Babylon Sphere?
It's funny, I've been thinking about this question because it's just how the character turned up originally, but obviously there are motivations behind it. And thinking about those motivations, I think it was a very good opportunity for me to depict sex in a positive way, and also to think about some things that interested me, as in the idea of it as a craft, as a job, as something that somebody could do and be proud of doing well. Babylon is in the extremely fortunate and unusual position of being able to say no, which is not true of the majority of real-world sex workers, obviously. She has a lot of choice about how and when she does her job and who with. But I think for me it was also partly probably I had a somewhat old-fashioned upbringing, and I'm fairly certain that some of the motivation was simply to clarify my own positive ideas about sex and sexuality and get rid of the last of some of the perhaps more restrictive attitudes that I was brought up.
Obviously Babylon still did well, so that we brought you back for Dangerous Gifts. What was it like going back into that world?
It was interesting and it was fun. It was a little scary, you know. People talk about difficult second album syndrome, and I discovered that there is such a thing as difficult second novel syndrome. I wasn't sure I could do it again, and I was working with, to some extent, with different characters. I was taking Babylon out of Scalantine. Well, one of the reasons for designing that world that way in the first place was so I would have a chance to explore some of the planes around Scalantine and take Babylon to those and have her experience different cultures and so forth around that. So to give me a viewpoint character with which to play with all those different cultures. It was a little scary, and I think there is a thing about if you finally got to the stage where you've got a book published, and especially if it's been pretty well received, there's a greater weight of expectation when you try and do it again. Fortunately, so far it's been reasonably well received. It was more straightforward in some ways because, unlike the first one, this has a single timeline rather than two parallel past and present timelines going on. So in terms of plotting, it was a little simpler, except when I got sort of 2/3 of the way through and realised that something massively wasn't working and had to go back and rip a lot of it out and start again. But that can happen with any